Hello property investors, welcome back to another one of our utilities and facilities management sessions. Today we're talking about water harvesting solutions, and I think this is a very good one to have, especially when we go through come to the end of winter. Everyone should be getting ready now for the summer rainfall. Winters in South Africa specifically is very dry, so we are a little bit desperate for water. So now's the time to start planning towards your rainwater harvesting systems. Another reason why it makes sense is because we're going through a little bit of water shedding statuses in different cities throughout the country, where the municipalities are battling to keep up with the demand for water, which is a good thing because we're obviously having more houses built. The areas are sort of developing a little bit more rapidly, and there's a higher demand for water. Unfortunately, the infrastructure hasn't kept up with this demand. So for me, the idea of rainwater harvesting, I think, should be a system that you put in place on your personal property, so your residential property where you live, and you should really be conscious of putting something in place on your rental properties. Where rainwater makes sense for me as a starting point is for you to be able to keep your landscaping up to its best. And what I mean from that perspective is, how are you watering the garden? How are you making sure that your garden is able to be watered? The last thing you want is to put that expense on your tenant, where they're having to spend money on water, so drinkable water, to water their gardens. So it's a good idea to put in place a rainwater capture system, just from a perspective of your landscaping care and so on. The reason why you would look at using rainwater, and there's two big reasons for me, is obviously the rainwater is free, so it makes sense to use that resource and make sure that you can spread out how often you're watering the gardens, that sort of thing, instead of just relying on any rainfall that happens. So for me, it's free water that you should be using to get your landscaping to look as lush as possible. And the other side to it is, if you are watering the garden with potable water, so drinkable water that comes through the municipality supply, a lot of municipalities charge you a fee to remove the sewage from your property. And the way that they sort of measure that is based on how much water goes into your property. So if you have 10 kiloliters of water coming into your property, that means 10 kiloliters would, in essence, flow out of the property through the sewage. So that's going through the toilets, the showers, the baths, the kitchens. So that water is then going into your mainline sewage system. So the municipality is charging you for what you receive. They're charging you for what leaves the property. So in this situation, it doesn't make sense to water the garden with your drinking water, with the potable water, because now you're paying twice to water your garden. So I really do encourage, install a rainwater system for watering the gardens, for looking after the landscaping, that sort of thing. And it's also quite a nice idea for topping up swimming pools, if there's swimming pools in that space. Okay, now talking the systems, very often we're not looking at rainwater from a drinking perspective, but it is possible to create a drinking water system from rainwater. It just means that a lot more care needs to be taken into the whole process of the installation. And I really do encourage you to research different companies in your area who are able to install a system that fully filters that rainwater. Now, when it comes to drinkable rainwater, it's important that you have a couple of filters in line in the process before gets through to your actual tap where you're drinking it. So the first filter would obviously be making sure your roofs are clean to start with. So good pressure wash of your roofs on a regular basis, maybe twice a year. Make sure you remove as much dust as possible, and any sort of mold or mildew that's growing on the surface of the roof. Obviously, specific roofs are important because you don't really want to do like what they call an asphalt roof. Anything that's got bitumen tar in it, that's not you don't really want to consume that kind of water, so stay away from that. The best roofs are really the steel roofs, aluminium roofs, the zinc roofs, where it's RBR or corrugated steel, that sort of thing. It's a lot easier to keep it clean, and there's less debris that's coming off it. Even cement tile roofs, over time that cement lets off a bit of residue, so it's less desirable from a drinking water perspective. Then going through your gutters, you need to make sure your gutters are clean, no leaves in the gutters. Then what we really recommend you do is a first flush system. And the first flush system is also a good idea when you're going to purely use the water for watering the gardens, and you're not using it for rainwater, for drinking water. The reason why it makes sense is you want to reduce as much dust going into your rainwater tanks. So depending on what size rainwater tank you have, the less dust or dirt that you can let into it means it reduces the amount of maintenance where you have to empty out that tank, clean out all the debris at the bottom of the tank, flush it out, that sort of thing. So you want to reduce how much water is going in. So for me, on a non-drinkable water, that you're happy to stop at that point where you're removing as many of the big solids out of the water before it goes into the collection tank. When it comes to drinkable water, you need to do another step there, and what they have. So from a first flush perspective, there's two models. One is just a leaf skimmer that takes off any big debris. The next one is sort of like a drain pipe that has a slow release of water. And what happens is that first flush system allows a big section of the pipe to fill up. It fills up with water. All the first flush dust will then settle into that pipe. And once that pipe is full, it will then continue to flow into your water tank itself. So that makes a lot of sense to then get that first light fine dust to be drained out. That pipe, when the rain stops, it drains out into the garden, and you're then able to clear that to get rid of any of those finer particles of dust. Then when it comes to the actual water container, obviously there's a lot of different container options out there. It can be anything from a small small plastic barrel. I wouldn't recommend the steel barrels for that perspective because of rust in those situations. But if it's available and you're purely using it for the garden watering, then there's no problem with that. When it comes to drinkable water, you need to be really cautious on what containers you use. Different plastics are toxic, so you need to make sure that it is the correct container for potable water, so as there isn't any risk of poisoning in that situation. Very important. Okay. When it comes to the water being stored, good idea to put mesh over there so mosquitoes can't go into those tanks and lay larvae, that sort of thing. So another level of protection. And then you've obviously got your different tanks. A very important thing to consider is the foundation for that tank. What is that tank going to be standing on? Because water is extremely heavy and it's flexible. So if the ground underneath the tank starts to subside, that water will follow gravity and it will crush the whole tank, and there's huge risk to damaging your property, where it can wash out foundations, it can hurt and injure people or animals and that sort of thing. So it's very important to take into consideration where your tank is going to be standing and to make sure it's got a solid foundation. A lot of accredited installers will make sure that they install a proper concrete slab to make sure there's no room for any area or for that tank to subside and to fall over. So it's very important for you to consider that. Okay, so up until that point, as far as the tanks go, that would be sufficient for what you're going to do if you're going to be watering your garden with that rainwater supply. If you want to then take it to a point where it's potable water, then you need to start treating that water. So some people will end up putting a chlorine floater inside that tank so as it reduces the amount of mildew or any growth that happens in the tank as a first preventative. So a slight amount of chlorine that's then leaching into the water. And then you need to have a sort of broader filtration system. So that will be stepping down in different microns. So the bigger filter where it's sort of got bigger holes between the membrane and the filter. That allows the water, as it drains through that, to remove any bigger solids that are in the water. And as it goes through the different filters, the filter itself gets finer and finer. So it starts off removing as many of the big debris as possible, finer level, so it gets anything that first filter won't remove, and it goes down to the point where it gets to microscopic dust. Okay, even at microscopic dust, it's still not good for you to drink. So the next level there is to UV treat that water. So it's an ultraviolet light that the water then flows through, and that kills any bacteria in the water. Something very important to bear in mind is when the water has bigger pieces of debris in it, it's possible for bacteria to almost hide behind that debris in sort of like a shade spot. So if you are not filtering the water well enough before it goes through the UV light, then there's huge potential for some of that bacteria not to be killed by the UV light. So it's important. Your UV light should be after those filters. And then obviously you go through into the house to wherever you're going to be using that water for drinkable water. I highly recommend another fine charcoal filter at that stage. And then also get your water treated from time to time. Well, not treated, tested from time to time to make sure that it is still okay for you to drink. So I think that kind of covers everything. For me, the biggest benefit of collecting the rainwater is to make sure that you're reducing the amount of money you're spending on water, and you're then using it to get your gardens to look as lush as possible, because the landscaping as part of your garden is such an important area to maintain the equity value of your properties. You don't want to lose capital growth on your property because of the curbside appeal. So really look after the gardens. Get your tenants to look after the gardens and give them the tools to help look after your gardens for you. It's an asset. You need to invest in it. You need to continuously be improving on it. Thank you very much for joining us today. We'll see you at the next one.